Erika is the general manager for sustainability at U.S. Steel, typical steel industry executive, just what you expect, right? So I guess the first thing is just tell us a little bit about U.S. Steel.
Yeah, sure, David, I'd be happy to. I know steel is not the most sexiest subject, right? But it's very much an integral part of all of our lives. Steel is infinitely recyclable, so it never loses any of its properties, and you can go from making a car to making rebar to making a can that food is put in to all kinds of products. And I want to start by just getting a show of hands, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'd like you to keep your hand raised if you answer yes to one of these questions. Okay. How many of you own a car? Okay. How many of you have ridden in a taxi or Uber or Lyft? Okay. How many of you have a washing machine at home and dryer? How many of you have a dishwasher? Right. Okay, I see one guy who still doesn't have his hand up. All right. How many of you have a refrigerator? Oh, he still hasn't raised his hand. It's amazing. Okay, so I think we have.
The guy doesn't have a house.
Oh no, okay, I see he raised his hand. So this is really just to show you the point that steel is everywhere, right? And I think people don't often think about steel because it's on the inside. As your lovely wife and I were having a conversation last night about, it doesn't come to mind, but it's very much an essential part of our lives.
But also, we think of steel as, even as Mike Schrepfer was referring to, as this big old heavy industry, dirty, polluting, irresponsible, unavoidable, what a mess. I mean, that's sort of the image, you know, Pittsburgh in 1930 is the image that comes to mind, right? So why is that wrong?
Well,
is it wrong?
Well, you know, we've come a long way. You know, U.S. Steel has been around for over 120 years. So, you know, history has sometimes filled with, you know, instances where things were done in the way that they were done then, but we've progressed. And today, you know, we have introduced our electric arc furnace technology, so our investment in mini mills. And it's a very different way of producing steel. It is less energy intensive, it's more efficient, and there are capabilities using electric arc furnace technology that are used for some of our advanced high-strength steels. But that to say, there still is a role for integrated furnaces in today.
Yeah, so just describe what those are, because everybody may not know how steel is made.
Sure. Oh, I didn't prior to joining U.S. Steel. So it's basically, and I think of it like baking, right? You have a lot of ingredients. You need an alloy. Iron ore is common. And you introduce different elements, and it then produces liquid steel. So in a traditional integrated mill, you need a variety of very carbon-intensive energy sources like coke, which is a purified form of coal. Whereas in electric arc furnace, you don't need those energy sources because you use electrification. So you lose electricity to actually produce the heat. And then you can use you know, up to 90% recycled steel, so using a lot of scrap steel as part of the material that goes into it.
But the old way of making steel is big blast furnaces that are incredibly energy inefficient and still produce the majority of the world's steel, right, overall.
Yeah, correct.
And those are, you know, polluting, very, very energy intensive facilities. But as we hear so much about a world that has to go all electric, you guys are moving in that direction dramatically, and your company more than even many other steel companies. And so these electric arc furnaces really are all electric, right? They don't burn anything. They just take electricity, but they take a lot of electricity.
Yes, there are some Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and I just want to clarify too, the blast furnaces have come a long way as well, from over 120 years. And there's all kinds of technology that's being utilized. We're exploring with various alliances and partnerships. We've created some hubs that will look at how to use carbon capture, use, and storage, as well as the integration of green hydrogen into blast furnace production, as well as electric arc furnace technology.
Right, and I know that for the electric mills that you have, and you're building a new huge facility. Where is that now?
That's correct. In Osceola, Arkansas. So we actually, in 2021, acquired Big River Steel, which is a steel startup. It was the first LEED certified steel mill in the U.S., and also it's the first responsible steel site certified mill in the U.S. And so we announced earlier this year our investment in a brand new steel electric arc furnace steel mill to be produced there. So in combination, we'll have about 6.2 million tons of lower carbon footprint steel produced in Arkansas.
You'll be able to produce 6 million tons a year at that facility.
Correct.
And it'll be all electric furnaces.
Correct.
But the amount of electricity is also huge. And I know you guys think a lot about what that means and how to address that. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people also, are not as familiar with how steel is made, but then people don't understand too the amount of energy required to make steel. And this movement towards cleaner energy production and scaling and infrastructure development is essential. There's a lot of talk around green hydrogen, and today it's approximately about 2 million tons of green hydrogen is produced. And to meet demand for steel production in 2050, estimates project that we'll need about 75 million tons of green hydrogen, and that will translate to about 4.4 kilowatts per hour for a year that we'll need. And to put that into context, in the US in 2021, there was a total of 4.1 kilowatts per hour produced. So you can imagine the amount of scaling and infrastructure we'll need to actually utilize green hydrogen to make it more efficient.
But why do you
cleaner.
think of hydrogen instead of other forms of alternative energy?
We're actually exploring a lot of other forms of alternative energy. In fact, in Arkansas, we've been working with the utility provider because steel actually not only can benefit from solar energy and wind energy, but steel is actually used to make and develop the infrastructure right behind solar and green and windmills as well. So we've announced a partnership where the local utility provider in Arkansas Energy will be building a solar farm which will produce about 250 megawatts per hour of solar energy. So we'll be able to utilize about half of that.
But the hydrogen will be, the reason you talk about hydrogen is what? Explain what how the hydrogen gets into the steel process.
So the hydrogen will be used as a form of energy.
You burn the hydrogen.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, and that can feed lower carbon and more efficient, energy efficient processes like direct reduced iron.
Does U.S. Steel have its own power plants in some instances?
We do in the Pennsylvania region. So, we talked about steel being infinitely recyclable. We also reuse a lot of our process gases to then turn into power, not only for our plants, but we also provide power to other industries.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that U.S. Steel in particular, but the American steel industry is kind of a world-leading industry, a world leader in the steel industry in going through a significant energy efficiency transformation. So talk about that, and why is the U.S. ahead? And how are we ahead, and how do we compare to others?
So in the U.S., we have about 2/3 electric arc furnace technology, 1/3 blast furnace, and it's reverse pretty much anywhere else in the world. In Europe, it's about 2/3 blast furnace, 1/3 electric arc furnace technology. And in Asia, their electric arc furnace technology is slowly developing in China, but in other countries, it's not yet present. So
and China's still predominantly blast furnaces.
Predominantly, yes, that's correct.
But how did we get ahead, and why is Europe behind? That's not usually the case with sustainable technology.
Europe is very progressive when it comes to regulations. So, I think there are a variety of factors. I think it's that entrepreneurial spirit and that people have decided to form, and utilize this technology because they saw the future and they see what's needed in the future to produce steel, and it's a much more climate-friendly path.
But did Europe do something wrong that they're so behind? Did they some over-regulation? Did that slow them down somehow?
It's possible. It's possible. I think that with the U.S. in particular, I think there was just a mindset and investment as well there to actually produce and manufacture the type of electric arc furnaces.
So that's really wonderful that there's that kind of vision here. And your company does go way back. It's 100 and some years old.
120 years old.
How many?
120 years old.
120 years old. You have your own iron mines in Minnesota. So you do the whole integrated process for the blast furnaces that are still a considerable portion. And then, talk a little more about this recyclability. I mean, because it will come up here tomorrow. We'll talk about plastic and what a disaster plastics recycling is. We all spend all this time separating plastic in our home, and most of it just gets burned, even when we separate it. But here you have steel, like you just need every last bit of steel to be recycled because you can use it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So approximately about 650 million metric tons of steel is recycled per year. And steel is more recycled than paper, glass, aluminum, and plastic combined.
Wow.
Yes.
In terms of the amount of weight?
In terms of the amount. Yeah. And I think that people, can appreciate the fact that, the steel industry and our company was practicing circular economy before it became in vogue.
Yeah.
Because we needed to, right?
So, yeah, I mean, I guess I wonder about can we do even better in collecting the steel? I mean, if we throw out a dishwasher or a washing machine or a car even, those, are they routinely collected? Does that system need to be improved, or where do we stand with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that the metal that's harvested from appliances, from cars, from construction is reused, and it's different. I have a technology background, and I used to work for Dell Technologies, and our challenge was getting technology back, right, from consumers in particular. I think with steel and the appliances and the cars and everything, it's not an issue, right? It's always been practiced, but there is going to be a point in time in which the demand for scrap metal to be reused is going to reach a point where there'll be a challenge whether or not we can collect the amount of steel that's going to be needed for electric arc furnaces technology.
Do you think, given your commitment to sustainable systems, to electric furnaces, and your desire for green energy, can U.S. Steel, or is U.S. Steel becoming a force to encourage the development of more sustainable electricity production?
Absolutely. And I think that's what we're doing with a lot of partnerships. So we've actually formed a couple of different partnerships, one with Into Market, which is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated towards low carbon technology development. And so we formed a partnership there to see how can we scale, hydrogen development. And eventually, we'll start off with a different color of hydrogen, but we want to get to green hydrogen. The same is true with carbon capture, use and storage. And, a lot of people are, wanting us to go faster, right? And we know that progress is not linear, right? It's not a straight line. So there are going to be, steps forward and steps backwards, but we think the right path for us is to invest in these technologies with like-minded companies to see how we can help scale it, because we can't do it alone. Like, no single company can do it alone. We need government partnerships, we need policy. That IRA will help as well, act as a catalyst and accelerator for some of these technology developments. And so we're working with the DOE, so a lot of different companies and academia as well.
And is the motive, talk a little more about the motivations for U.S. Steel to have made this turn towards sustainability. Some of it probably is that it's actually cheaper to do it this way. Is that a big factor? And to what extent is it that you just had to confront the fact that your industry was perceived as a very dirty industry, then you had to change that?
Yes, the hard to abate sector.
Yeah.
So, it's actually one of the decisions that led me to join U.S. Steel, because it is very much a part of our corporate strategy. So sustainability and our corporate strategy are integrated, which I think gives us a lot of advantages, because as we look at where we're headed from a company and where we want to make our investments, all of that has sustainability benefits, and that's always a lens and a criteria in decision making. So I think it's a matter of knowing that where we're headed as a company and how we're transforming is important, but it's also recognizing that we can act as a catalyst for change as well.
It's great that you want to do that. That's what I find impressive. Who has a question? Anybody have a question about U.S. Steel or what sustainable steel really means.
There's one over here.
Is there a hand somewhere? No.
Over here.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Naveen Kunde with the Clorox company. I actually have a metallurgy background, so I know a little bit more about steel.
I don't.
No. This is a softball question. I'll ask you the hardball later over lunch. I'm very interested in the ecosystem work that U.S. Steel is thinking of doing. About 20 years ago, a lot of the big steel companies, LTV Steel and others, just went out of business because they got disrupted with the electric arc furnace technology coming along, Nucor and these other people. U.S. Steel didn't. A couple of others survived. So the business model you figured out, you bought Big River and so on. What's happening on the ecosystem level? Because there's steel producers in India, Japan, all over the place that it's very dirty. And I know growing up in India that there are entire regions dedicated to the steel industry where they feed from one to the other. It's an entire ecosystem developed in certain regions where the iron ore comes from there and you make the steel there and the coke and so on. Can you talk a little bit about the U.S. Steel's ambitions in building these ecosystems? Because I think without ecosystem approach, you cannot solve some of the major sustainability problems that we're going to face. And steel and concrete are the two big ones. If you read Bill Gates' book, that's what he talks about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great question. And I alluded to some of the alliances that we're forming as well. But I think if we're going to come to a solution that will be impactful and scalable, we have to create those ecosystems. So in some cases, we're actually working with our peers and competitors in these alliances. A lot of academia and then a lot of private sector as well. So EQT, Equinor, Shell, a lot of different companies are coming together. So I think your comment too on business models is a good one, because I think in order for us to actually address the climate solution and climate change, we have to think differently about the traditional business models, and that cannot survive and that cannot be the end solution, right, that we need. We have to think differently. And in some cases, it could be that maybe a steel company may actually produce green hydrogen in the future. I'm not saying that's our strategy right now, but and I think that's what we need to do, is we need to think about alternative business models.
Anybody else over there? You mentioned the internet I keep thinking it's the Internet Reduction Act. That doesn't make sense. Although internet is being reduced right now in some weird way. But the Inflation Reduction Act clearly is something you're applauding. And people don't think of heavy industry as being in favor of that sort of thing. What do you think is going to be possible now that massive climate bill has been implemented that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do?
Well, we're hopeful that it'll be a catalyst for change, and it'll accelerate the timeline for development of these different technologies and infrastructure. And along with that will be needed policy to support that investment. Because in some cases, I was talking with a woman at the conference, and she was mentioning how it took like 6 years for permitting to create one commercial CCUS site in the US. And it's like, we need to be able to go faster.
It's carbon capture.
Carbon capture, yes. So, we're really hopeful that there'll be some concrete projects that'll have a faster timeline to implementation.
There's a
with
heck
the
of a
DOE.
lot more money out there.
Oh, yes, I know.
Which is really great. Well, thank you so much, Erika. Really good to have you here and to hear about a very unexpected sustainability champion. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, David.